Hello, my name's Tolu. I'm a chemical engineer and I'm also the writer of a blog named inSTEM. inSTEM is a STEM blog showcasing career experiences of individuals who have studied science, technology, engineering, or mathematics related subjects. I also highlight innovation, particularly ones with STEM at their core, as a way of highlighting the impact the STEM has on everyday life. In this video, I'm going to be speaking to 4 engineers about their career journeys, and the theme of our discussion is going to be graduate scheme versus direct entry roles. As a university student, one of the most important decisions I had to make was on what to do after graduating from university. And I wish I knew a lot more about the routes that were available at the time I was applying for jobs and the benefits of the different routes as well. So for that reason, I've brought together 4 engineers who have either gone through a graduate scheme route or a direct entry route to highlight the opportunities and benefits available through these routes, so that if you're considering them, you are better informed on what you're applying for, and also to share some of the drawbacks and limitations they've encountered and how they've been able to overcome these limitations. Ultimately, whether you're a student or you're in the early years of your career, this video could be useful in understanding how you can take ownership of your career and build a successful career as an engineer. I hope you enjoy watching. Please send us your feedback and post any questions in the comment section. Thank you. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves now. So I'm going to call the names so there's no confusion. Patrick, can you go first, please?
So hi, my name's Patrick Adesito. I'm a production engineer for Affinity Water. I've been doing the job for about a year now. So.
Okay. And what did you study at university?
I studied chemical engineering at university. Okay. Master's route.
Master's route, okay. And you next, Joseph?
Hi, so my name is Joseph Adebi. I'm a project manager working for Mace with a background in civil and structural engineering. So I studied civil and structural engineering at university, then did a master's in international construction management at University of Bath.
Jess, you next?
So I'm Jessica Naniakara. I work at Air Products as a facility operations supervisor, which I've been doing for about a year and a half. My background is chemical engineering, which I did at uni, master's route, and I'm now a chartered engineer.
Awesome.
I'm Vanessa Burton. I'm an assistant engineer at Mott, MacDonald. I studied a master's in civil engineering, and I'm currently seconded to a client for a role for the enabling works for a nuclear power plant.
So let's dive straight into the questions, guys. If I start with the people who did, actually, I'll just throw out the question to all of you. Did you feel any pressure to apply for graduate scheme roles at university? Jess, can you take this first and then
Yeah, sure. So I don't think I personally did, but I did a placement year and I used kind of the same route to get a job afterwards, which was looking at GradCracker, which was the website at the time that had loads of grad schemes on. And that's how I got my placement. So it's quite natural for me to go back onto that same website to look for jobs afterwards. I don't remember graduate schemes being particularly pushed, but I don't remember ever really seeing that many direct entry roles either. So I think it was the easier thing to do just because they seem to be more kind of accessible and easy to find to apply for.
Right, okay. What about you, Patrick? Did you feel any pressure to apply for graduate scheme roles?
No, not at all. I think, like Jess, one route, direct entry or grad route wasn't necessarily pushed. I didn't feel amongst grads that the direct entry route was discussed. Maybe because the grad scheme route through websites like GradCracker probably pushed a lot more and seemed a lot more natural, given that students do industrial placements. So I think for my when I was applying for jobs, I definitely didn't consider any direct entry routes, but and I don't think it was generally discussed amongst my peers.
Okay. Vanessa, what
I'm going to say I did think there was a push to get on a graduate placement scheme. I think I didn't even know at the time of your university you could apply for direct route. And I'd say there was, from getting into the university and speaking to other friends at other universities doing engineering, different types, I think the path it was known as was you go to university, potentially get a placement, you apply for a grad scheme and get onto the grad scheme, because I hadn't really seen many people who had done direct entry either. So it wasn't even a route I thought that was available to take.
Mace, what about you?
To be honest, I just wanted to get a job. So at the time, I remember I applied for. I didn't feel like I was under pressure, to be honest, to go into a graduate scheme, but I was trying to find what was available, because at that time, we just sort of come out of the recession, and it was quite difficult to find any jobs at the time. So I just looked at the different options that was out there, from graduate schemes to a direct entry, and I was just fortunate to have a direct entry job, to be fair. So yeah.
That's interesting. So I'm quite similar to Vanessa in that I felt like there was a push for graduate scheme roles. We both went to the same university, and maybe that's the common denominator.
Maybe that's why.
Maybe where you study plays a role, and maybe it's because of the people who've gone through that university as well. So there might be that element as well. Okay, so so I'm going to go to Jess. You mentioned that you're the assistant plant manager currently at Air Products, which is great, and that's quite a significant accomplishment. I would like to know, would you say that the fact that you went through a graduate scheme role has enabled you to achieve that kind of position? Because that's quite a senior position. And I know that usually graduate schemes are conveyed to or they're sold to students, university students, as a means of accelerating their careers into leadership roles. So would you say that that's played a part in you achieving your current position?
I think it certainly hasn't hindered me. I think it probably has helped me personally to get to the position I am in now. But I also don't think it's the only possible way to get there, because a lot of my peers around the country that are doing the same role within Air Products, but just at different sites, have got to that position through all sorts of totally different routes. Some of them haven't even gone to university and done a degree. So I think for me personally, it probably has benefited me, but I don't think it's by any means the only way to get there.
Okay, interesting. And Patrick, can you tell us a little bit more about your graduate scheme structure? Because I know that graduate schemes vary from company to company in terms of the duration and also the rotational scheme. So can you give us a bit of background into
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. So my graduate scheme was as an operational manager in angling water, which based themselves out of the east of England, pretty much. So anywhere down as far south as Essex and anywhere far north as Lincoln. So I undertook, I think it was 4-month rotations all around the business in different areas and different functions, just to get a holistic view of the water operations. That'd be water, wastewater, distribution. And what this essentially allowed me to do is engage with all the senior managers across all the various roles. Now, I guess the benefits in doing my grad scheme that way was, like you say, you get to meet so many people across the business, you get to show face, you get to engage with a variety of projects. The negatives were that you weren't in one place long enough to really fulfill a project in full. So essentially, when I moved on, I felt like I had a lot of half-done work, which isn't necessarily a negative. I mean, I've got to where I am today because of all the experiences that I managed to get. I think I was on the scheme for 2 years, and I think I did about 8 different placements. Yeah.
Okay, what about you, Vanessa? So you enrolled onto a graduate scheme, but you haven't really kind of done the typical graduate scheme.
No, I was awarded an University of Surrey and IC scholarship from Surrey. And what that did was when you were 18, 19, you got matched with a company. So I was matched with Mott MacDonald. I did, throughout my university, I did my placement and summer placements with them. So that was part of the scheme. And then I joined at the end of university onto the graduate scheme. So my role was a little bit different. So someone could say I was lucky enough from doing my interview back when I was 19, as long as I did well and worked hard, I kind of had a job. I didn't do placements in terms of rotation because it's a bit different. I was more to one unit. Yeah. So when I think I started till now, I've probably worked about a year on each of the projects I worked on. So major civils, major construction. I've been really lucky because I've worked on, because Mott MacDonald, and we have quite a lot of international projects as well. I've been able to work on projects abroad, projects in the UK, and get quite a good breadth of experience because unlike going to different departments in major construction projects, everyone gets brought together. It's like an own project. So you get to see MEP, project controls, civil engineers, so architects, and you're all working alongside one another. And then in that project, what can sometimes happen is you can rotate or take additional roles. So you may be the civil engineer, but you're also package managing something, or we're looking at how to do commercial. And that's probably my route more of how I've done my career. So a couple of projects, but various roles within those projects.
Interesting. And Joseph, so you went straight into a graduate role. Did you find, so whereas these guys had, a bit more structure to their training and development and, the rotational schemes, they had an idea of what they were going to, or what to expect before starting their roles. What was it like for you going into a graduate role?
I think for me, one of the benefits I would say of going directly into a graduate role, you take more ownership of your career development. So when I started with a company called Skanska. I worked in the design office in Skanska Tech in Wales. And while working in Wales, I was designing primary schools. So I was doing structural calculations of primary schools and office buildings. And I think after a while, I decided to think to myself, you know what, can I see myself doing this for another 5 to 10 years, churning calculations day in, day out? And I remember something my line manager said to me at the time, use this opportunity to determine what kind of engineer you want to be, because I was then seconded to another business unit to get some experience on site so that I can get that experience and bring it back into the design office. So when I went to site, I realized I'm more of a people person. I loved engaging with different people, and I could see I'm always more geared to the sort of management of different subcontractors. So rather than sitting and doing different calculations. So I pretty much started, as I said, from the design office, then went to site and decided to transfer completely to working on site as a graduate construction supervisor. So my first job there was building a prison, HMP Thameside prison in Woolwich. So after doing the prison job, I went to work for a very short period in Berks on the Road London Hospital as a graduate construction supervisor. Then from there, worked on the Ministry of Defence as a construction supervisor. Then went to New York to work on a university building for University of Columbia. And I was working as an assistant project manager. Then came back to the UK to do the phase 2 of the Ministry of Defence to work as a construction manager. Now moved to Mace as a project manager, initially working at Heathrow. Of course, the pandemic hit, so not that much jobs going on there now. So now I'm working on HS2 Euston redevelopment. So what I would say is the graduate entry, direct entry for me allowed me to have that flexibility to move around and work on different projects and not necessarily be in a graduate scheme that's a bit more sort of structured and you have to follow it to the end. So I'll say for me anyways, it was very beneficial from that point of view to have to take more ownership of how you want your career to develop and what areas you want it to go into.
That's very interesting. I'm going to go to the graduate scheme people now. Did you feel like you had total ownership of your career? Were there any points during your graduate scheme where you felt like you didn't enjoy a particular rotation and perhaps you wanted to do something different, or did you find out early on into your graduate scheme that you knew what you wanted, or you discovered what you wanted to do, and did you feel like you were hindered because you had to commit to this scheme? Jess, maybe you can take this one first.
Yeah, sure. So overall, I think I would say that I enjoyed all of my roles. There was one role that I did because everybody had said you should do at least one role in engineering and one role in operations. And right from the start, I kind of thought like, I think I'll prefer operations. I think that's kind of where I want my career to go. But everyone says, oh, you should try engineering just to make sure it's not for you. So I did. And in hindsight, it probably was good experience, but it taught me something that I already sort of knew about myself. So perhaps it's more helpful if you're not sure which way to go than if you've already got a good idea which area of the business you want to be in. So other than that, I felt like I think it depends on the company you work for hugely, but within Air Products, they give you quite a lot of say in what role you have next. So you go and you might interview for the role if the manager wants to interview the candidates, and you speak to your sponsoring manager, who's like the senior manager within the company, about, oh, these are the gaps I've got in my chartership or in my experience that I want to fill, and this is why I'm interested in these roles. And then obviously not everybody can do the same role every year. But they try and match it so that everybody's doing different roles every year and they're getting the experience they want them to get, because at the end of the day, it's kind of in Air Products' best interest to have kind of well-rounded engineers that have done things they're interested in, but got the breadth of experience as well that benefit them in the future. So yeah, I think I felt like I had quite a big say in my roles, and most of the time I got roles that at least were in my sort of top 3 roles on offer. So yeah, I think I've had a positive experience of it.
Okay, that's very interesting. And so Patrick, you're no longer in your graduate scheme, you're now working as a, I guess, professional, full-time professional. Not that you weren't as a graduate scheme, employee. Did you find that now that you have to basically make all the decisions about your career, so what to do next, did you find it to be quite a big jump for your graduate scheme? So I do feel like with graduate schemes, I feel like you're given like a 2-year plan and you sort of have to adhere to that, which is great because a lot of graduates don't know, they need that support to start with. But I do feel like sometimes it's not entirely realistic or representative of the real world, because most people really have to sort of navigate through their own careers. And I do wonder how people who've gone through graduate schemes, deal with the change of them having to fully manage their own careers. So how did you deal with that change?
For me, it was quite a steep change, actually. I think having that tailored plan for you for 2 years is essentially a massive introduction into just working life. With me having the various rotations, you're having to move places, you're having to get to know people. So there's a very interpersonal aspect of it that you're just growing up. And then when it now comes to considering what you want to do, it was for me, it was very easy to make that choice, having gone on the variety of rotations. I would have said that I needed that 2 years to do that. But even within the broad choice of where I wanted to specialize, there's still particular nuances in a variety of roles. So I think at this stage in my career, I'm probably there. I'm trying to understand specifically what I want to do. One big change for me was that because although I was working within an engineering environment, I was working out of operations, which doesn't necessarily require you to have any technical expertise. So upon coming out of my grad scheme, I did feel like I was technically lacking. And where I did then move companies after my grad scheme, there was an evident gap in knowledge personally for me. And all the skills that I felt I had built up during my degree almost needed retraining. So within the decision of what do I do next and realizing this gap, my focus has been trying to harmonize the two and to find a new starting point as such, from which then I can pursue a chartership and my further career.
Awesome, great answer. So I'm not going to go to Vanessa. I'd like to hear a bit more about the benefits of your route. And, I think with graduate scheme tailored roles, you do have access to a lot of things. You have access to mentorship, to experiencing many different sides of the business, which maybe someone from who's gone through a direct entry role may not have access to. So can you just highlight some of these benefits and share how they've helped in your career progression?
Yeah, I think like Jessica said, I think access to senior leadership is there, it's guaranteed. They're just as invested as you are in your development, because they really truly do see you as an asset to the business. So I think for me that was a big benefit. I was able to gain opportunities that I probably wouldn't have had so easily, because these people are busy people. You don't have access to them as easily as you would have if you were in a direct entry role. And probably the second benefit I can think of, having moved company, even though all my rotations were quite short stint, I can boast about having worked in these functions, and looking to make an impact in that short space of time means that you have a lot of information. Okay, you don't have a lot of work to back up for it, but you have a lot of understanding of how a business functions, how all the different departments and business units liaise with one another. And that really does go a long way in sort of establishing you as a person who knows how to function within a business. I think the tangible benefit for me is, if I were to look at my wage based on my experience, just for example, I'm probably about 5-6 years ahead of probably where I would have stayed, where I would have been if I stayed at the business. And that's simply because various companies realize essentially what kind of skills you have, and because of the exposure you've had elsewhere. So yeah, those are the main benefits that I can see.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you for that. Vanessa, what about you? What benefits did you get from your experience?
I think so. Where my experience was lucky was when I joined the business, a lot of my training was completed already. So I always make the joke of, on my first day, I was handing my project and said, it's time to get to work, which I was able to do because I knew the people, I knew the team. So I was able to jump right into it. Because I'd use my placements doing both project management and technical skills, it had also meant that when I joined, I had a lot more confidence. I knew who to speak to. I knew who the people were specialised in different parts of engineering. I knew the routes to getting my calculations checked, or where the systems at MacDonald. So I didn't need to be trained in that. I was already quite proficient. I also have been really lucky because, again, our route doesn't have rotations in the same way, but our graduate scheme is to get you chartered. Mine is the IC chartership route. So I think I had a lot of say in how I wanted my career to go, apart from my first role. My first role got given to me, but that was because it had a lot of technical experience. And one of the things I was taught by my manager was the time was when I was young, try and get as much technical experience as possible, because as I got older, I got more expensive. So people expected me to be faster. so so that was really good, and that was such important, I think, for me. And then I also got site experience. And like I said, now I've been to a client office. So I've done the three, from consultancy, doing the calcs, the project management, and then being on site of what you created and making sure it's constructible and all the issues that can come about there. And I think that's for my benefit of probably them knowing me, them watching me grow since I was 18 as well. And that route, they could really understand the person that I was. And I could also build a greater rapport as well, because they knew I was coming back every year. So that was quite nice. Yeah, well, it's just quite a different route, but it's been really beneficial for me.
Exposure. Okay. So I'm going to come to you, Joseph. So you've gone into a graduate direct entry role. There's no formal agreement about mentorship or training and development, as it usually is with a graduate scheme, right? How were you able to gain access to these things? Because I think most employers are committed to providing these opportunities. And I just feel like maybe when you haven't undergone a graduate scheme, you kind of have to look for it yourself. How did you navigate these things?
I would say it's basically being, as I said, being proactive about what you want out of your career. For me, I actually had to go out to ask individuals to be my mentor. Also, having to reach out in terms of my personal development, what I require in terms of development, what kind of development I need. So, for example, when I was in the design office, I realized, the next stage for me is to be chartered. And to get a master's will accelerate that process. So I had a conversation with my line manager, I told him what my research yielded. And I said, look, I want to do a master's. I don't mind doing it part-time. Do you fund it? Will the business fund it? So I had a meeting with the director, nodded his head, yeah, no problem, signed it off, started the master's. Now, if I was in a graduate scheme, I don't think I would have had as much sort of flexibility to say, oh, I want to do a master's, because there's a structured program in place for the graduates to follow. So for me, it's having to take that responsibility on how you want your career to be shaped, and also being proactive to identify the people in the business that might help you progress effectively into where you want to go to. So especially when I moved from being in the design office to being on site, you realize there's a lot more options and opportunities, because you're not just engaging with people, the internal stakeholders, you're engaging with external stakeholders. You're also engaging with, different subcontractors who you learn a lot from as well. So having that reach enabled me to develop in a different way that I think it would have been a bit more challenging if I was in the design office, if that makes sense. Yeah. And as I said, going back to the point about developing your career, you need to identify as well what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. I knew for a fact that my strengths were, engaging with people, managing people. So being on site was sort of the best environment to cultivate that gifting. So it was very easy from then on, really, to be able to get the things or the tools I needed to progress my career.
That's really great. I think what's really important for me to highlight here is hearing your stories, and hearing, the people who've gone through the graduate scheme route and direct entry route. There are actually a lot of similarities. And I think perhaps with the direct entry route, or what Vanessa's done, her route, sometimes you're not aware of the benefits that are available through this route. So if you think that you're going to be in one role, you may not think that you could get exposure to different elements of the business as well, which obviously you've both demonstrated that you were able to get those exposures, be it getting site experience or working on different projects, and ultimately meeting different people at varying levels of the business. So I think it's really important for people to understand that a lot of the perks that are sold for the graduate scheme roles are actually available with the direct entry roles. I guess maybe the difference is you have to be a little bit more proactive with the direct entry roles and essentially, take advantage of the opportunities you have with either routes, really. I think there are opportunities, with graduate schemes and direct entry roles, and it's for you to really identify those opportunities and maximize them. Joseph, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was also going to say, I think with the direct entry role, it kind of feeds your hunger. You're not being spoon-fed to like do certain things while you're in the graduate scheme, but in the direct entry role, you're hungry. You got that desire to want to progress or speak to a certain individual to find your way to navigate through the business and also even with your career.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the role of a student. And I have certain feelings or myths that I'd like you guys to either agree to based on your experience or disagree. Share your views and let us know what the fact is, basically. Like it's like a sort of myth busting type sort of session we're leading into. So for the graduate scheme panelists, so I'm considering applying for a graduate scheme, but I'm slightly worried that I'm not going to make much of an impact on the business because I'm only going to be spending 6 months, for example, on a role. And I wondered what your thoughts are on this. So Jess, would you like to?
My experience is the Airphonics graduate schemes is 1 year roles, so they are much longer than 6 months. I think certainly within a year, you do spend a bit of time learning, especially if you're new to the company, but that would be the case in any role. Learning the role, learning how everything works, networking. The roles that I've seen graduates, or jobs that I've seen graduates get given are the ones that people really want done, but they're just not as high up the priority list, but they're still important. And so, yeah, you can make a real impact quite quickly. It might feel at the end of the role like you haven't completed everything you wanted to complete, or you haven't, tied everything up in a nice parcel to hand over because it's just an arbitrary date that you move on. But I think the benefit that a graduate gives to a team is probably not as visible to a graduate as it is to everybody else in the team.
Vanessa, so I started like yourself, or I'm considering going through your route. Like you said, you were given a role, your first role, you didn't have that much of a say on what you did. But I've also identified that I'd like to do an additional qualification in that year, in that first year of my role.
One thing to note is when I said I was given my role, I would say when you join, you get put on a project. So you get put onto a project where it's available and need someone. But I know that I did some additional learning during my time on my graduate scheme and during my route as well. I went back to do some modules at university. Of course you can. I think it's a lot of, I don't know about doing the role Jessica and Patrick, but rotation, even now there's online universities. You are the master of your career and you're the master of what your life and what you want to achieve. And I think no company is going to stop you. You may be tired because you're doing a lot more work, but it's for you to really grasp and take your career in your hands and do what you want to do. No one would have a problem.
That's awesome. Patrick, I'm going to ask you the same question.
I think the key term is value. So I think it's important to ascertain the value to you and the value to the business. Now, as Vanessa said, time is a big factor. And as Jessa said, a lot of your time actually goes to learning, just generally how the business functions, where to go, who to speak to. So I would first say, before that decision is made, just consider what your priorities are. And secondly, recognize the value which it will add to yourself and the business. And then have those discussions with the managers to highlight that value, to show why it may be necessary. So I think that there's more than enough resource out there. There's what they call Moocs, which are free online courses by universities. You can do them from Harvard, you can do them from anywhere in the UK. And you can they can be signed off as certified courses. And there's a variety of ways which you can qualify yourself for particular subjects in which you want to study further, really. So I think that there's more than enough routes for it to be an option.
Awesome. Okay, so another, I guess, thought or myth. I've done a lot of research online, and I found out that my graduate scheme counterparts are going to be getting paid quite significantly more than me. Someone like me considering going through a direct entry role. So Joseph, I'm not asking people to disclose their starting salaries, but I guess my question is, how do I overcome that? How is there room for me to negotiate, for example, even starting out as a sort of fresh graduate, and how can I potentially bridge that gap?
All right. So with a direct entry route, with a starting salary, sometimes it might not be as high as what you get with a graduate scheme. However, going back to what Patrick's mentioned before, if you can demonstrate, the value that you add to the business unit, to your team, when it comes to a salary review, you can have that discussion to say, look, this is what I've been able to do. I've actually achieved some of the objectives, or most of the objectives you've given to me. Therefore, I believe I am suited now potentially for a salary review or an increase. As I said, when you are in the graduate direct entry route, you take more ownership on what you do and how you develop. So you can decide to do those extra courses, for example, which will add value to not just the business, but to you. And using that, you can, demonstrate to your line manager that, look, I've been able to accomplish or complete these courses. Therefore, it might be worth having a salary review now. But what I would mention as well is, because of for example, my route, the route I took, being able to work on different projects, working in different teams, my salary was, compared to a graduate who did the graduate scheme, I would probably say I was a bit ahead, because of the different experiences I was able to pick up over the period. And I can demonstrate that compared to someone that I did 2 years, for example, in a graduate scheme. I've had 2 years solid experience within a particular role. So for that reason, I've got enough to back it for me to have that increase. So that's the angle I would sort of come from if I was taking that graduate route, direct route, because you've got that solid 2 years, 3 years experience within that particular role.
I think it's quite useful for a lot of people to pay attention to that. I think you should understand the value that you're adding to the business, and we're not taught about negotiating or recognizing our value at university. And I think it's an important quality to have the boldness to have these conversations with your manager. So if you're worried that if you haven't got a graduate scheme, you may not do well as financially, you can spend the first sort of year or two getting exposure to different sort of projects or business areas and use that as your justification for better pay. Just out of interest, Jess, as someone who's enrolled onto a graduate scheme, do you have the opportunity to, ask for salary increases? So I think most employees have like annual reviews or like media reviews where these conversations can be had. Is the opportunity extended to graduate scheme students or graduates rather?
So I can't speak for all graduate schemes, but within Air Products, when I joined, it was a 5-year scheme. It's now a 3-year scheme. But when you joined, they were like, here's your 5-year scheme, here's how it's laid out, here's the like salary review dates. So they were already fixed, and basically everyone would get a salary rise within 6 months of each other. Now, I think because it's so structured, it then leaves you a little bit like, oh, how does this work when you've been working there for a while? And all of a sudden people aren't coming to you like, oh yeah, here's your raise because you've done your 2 years or whatever. So it does mean that your learning curve on that is a little bit later. I've been quite fortunate in that I've moved roles. Even since being on the graduate scheme, I've kept moving roles. And the people I've worked for have been really proactive about it, being like, right, you've hit all your targets. Yeah, I think you deserve a pay rise. I've found it that I've had quite an easy time and not had to have particularly tough conversations or had a lot of pushback, but I know other people have, so yeah.
Awesome, that's awesome. So I'm going to be going onto the sort of final question now. And it's just a word of, I guess, your tips for people, for students who are considering or in the process of applying for graduate roles, be it graduate schemes or direct entry. I think we've established that both roles or both routes have very common elements. So it's very much about getting your foot, in the door really and building yourself from there. What advice would you like to give to someone who is in the process of applying and about, how they can progress their career regardless of which route they take? Vanessa, you can start this with us.
Thanks. I would say it's not how you start, but it's how you finish. So regardless of the route that you take or how the different entry routes, take every bit of experience you get, push forward, because as you've heard today, the different routes doesn't mean you're going to have a different or a better career. It's all about you and how you action it. And I would definitely, I think the other bit of advice I get just kind of went out my head, so I can't remember the other bit. Sorry.
Give me a shout and you can.
Yeah.
Patrick, what about you? What would you like to say to
I would say, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, be proactive. Be proactive in the discussions that you have, in the activities that you do. Also be intentional about what you do, and recognize, although you might be in this small bubble at work, actually your work spans further than your mind can imagine. One thing I would always encourage is recognize what institute you want to join if you can, and if you can't decide one, choose two, or three even, and utilize the opportunities that they have for people in their early careers or who are graduates, and build your network as early as you can in your career, to then really understand how you can influence it in the right way. So yeah, those would be my bits of advice.
Excellent. Jason, what about you?
I think what I would encourage anyone going into any of these routes is be that sponge to absorb, to take in knowledge and to learn, because at the end of the day, the role of the graduate is to learn as much as possible. And when senior management or your line managers recognize that you have that spirit and humility to want to learn from people, it's very easy to be supported in that sense from these individuals. So I'll certainly say, just no matter what route you take, just be that individual that you want to learn and want to develop, because once you have that attitude, people are more willing to help you to progress.
Excellent. And Jess?
Yeah, so I'm just going to really build on what everybody else has said, really. I think about what you want. So if you know that there's something you definitely don't want to do, probably wouldn't go and try that. But if you're not sure what you want to do, perhaps a graduate scheme could work. But equally, direct entry gives you so many opportunities to still move around that it's not like you're choosing your job for life and that's all you're ever going to do. So actually, both routes can work really well. While you're there, yeah, learn as much as you can, learn about the things you're interested in. And if there's something you're interested in that you're not getting the opportunity for, ask, because often it might not be obvious to you how you might get that experience, but you know, the people around you, there's things going on in the background, they might be like, oh, actually, there's an opportunity here. So, you know, I'll second you to this team, or you can work with this team to get that experience. Yeah, so there's loads of opportunities. And don't worry if you don't feel like you're making loads of impact, because often you're making more impact than you realise. It's just more visible to people around you than to you yourself. Yeah, if you've got, the other thing I would say is if you've got gaps. So I started looking at chartership quite early on because it was something that I knew I wanted to pursue. And there were things that I saw as gaps in my chartership application that I wasn't sure if I'd be able to get the experience within Air Products. So then I looked at other opportunities, especially soft skills, that sort of thing. You can get that experience outside of your work career through like volunteering or youth services, working with different groups, charities, etc. So even if you're not getting the experience you want inside your career, inside your job, yeah, don't be afraid to go and look elsewhere and see if there's other ways you can access it.